can see that. Yeah, we can see that. I can't see you when that light's on, but I can see the light. Exactly.
Should I cross this border or not?
The Eastern Sussex Republican Club is proud to bring to you this evening Mr. Rob Arlett and Mr. Gene Truono, running for the federal senatorship from the state of Delaware. The Eastern Sussex Republican Club is a group of people in Sussex County looking at wise, conservative efforts that can be placed in state government. We would like to introduce to you our president, Ms. Phoebe Conningham. Phoebe? Phoebe has joined the Sussex County residents starting in 2010, has been an active member of the Republican Club. She started in 1969, getting her PhD at the University of California, Berkeley. So she came from one coast to the other. We're very proud of Phoebe, as she is our president of the Eastern Sussex Republican Club. In 1979, most people don't realize she worked for the Rockefeller Foundation. She also worked for the Smith-Richardson Foundations and was an appointee under President George W. Bush. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would please welcome with me with a round of applause, our president, Phoebe Cunningham.
Thank you, Kevin. And I do believe I can lead you now in the Pledge of Allegiance.
All rise.
We've got a big flag right up there. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and let's enjoy our debate.
Moderating our debate this evening is a fine young man, Mr. Mike Bradley, from WGMD 92.7. Michael will now explain the rules of the debate.
Kevin, I appreciate that very much, and I forgot to give Kevin a bio, so he did me a solid by not just making up whatever he wanted to just now, so I appreciate it. It's really good seeing everybody, and I want to welcome everyone this evening, as Kevin said, to the Eastern Sussex Republican Club's U.S. Senate Republican candidate debate here at the beautiful Milton Theater. It's my first time here, and very honored to be here. I am Mike Bradley, and I'm very happy to be your moderator this evening. I appreciate the invitation. I definitely look forward to an interesting and informative debate between the GOP candidates, Rob Arlett and Gene Truono. I've had both of them on my radio program a couple of times already, and we get a chance really to delve deeper than we get to do on radio, which unfortunately we only get usually about 10 minutes or so, so I'm really looking forward to it. And of course, as you know, the winner will take on Democratic incumbent Senator Tom Carper in the general election. The primary, just to let you know, is Thursday, September the 6th. The last day to register for the primary is August the 11th. Active military and civilians living outside of the U.S. Can register for the primary up to August the 20th, so they have an extra 9 days. Now, some of you already had a chance to meet and talk with the candidates before the debate. For those that did not, who got here a little bit later, which is fine, you'll get that chance at the end of the debate after 9 p.m. All right, so the debate rules are as follows. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening and closing statement. We will toss a coin, which, by the way, Phoebe, I'm going to need a coin. I meant to bring one with me. But we will toss a coin to decide who goes first. Now, I want to explain, that candidate can decide to go first on your opening statement, or you can defer to either go first or second on your closing statement. The candidate that loses the coin toss will get the first question, and then I will alternate from there. I will ask the questions by category. So, for instance, if you happen to be a little bit more interested in domestic affairs over foreign affairs or vice versa, you're able to focus in on one over the other. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to respond. The opposing candidate will have a 1 minute rebuttal if applicable. An example would be if the other person's name is mentioned or their record or their career is brought up, for instance. Now, I'm sure I may have to determine it sometimes, whether that is warranted, and you may chime in on that, and I'll say yay or nay on that, but I think we can get through that in a civilized manner. I will ask questions, of course, to begin with, and we will receive responses for the next hour, and then take an intermission where I'll turn things over to Kevin, who'll have a few announcements to make, but the audience then at that point can sign up for questions, and Kevin will have the microphone. During the audience questions, the candidates will have a 2 minute response time and a 1 minute rebuttal. The lighting system, gentlemen, has been explained. I'll just go over it. 1 white light means 2 minutes remaining. 2 white lights, 1 minute remaining. 2 white lights and a yellow flag mean 30 seconds remaining. And 2 white lights and a red flag means end of time. So there you go on that. All right, so Kevin, you've got the coin. So we will, let's see, who do we? Heads or tails on this one?
Heads or tails?
Who's calling it? Who do you want to call?
Who would like to call?
Go ahead.
Heads it is.
All right, heads it is. So, Gene, what would you prefer to do? Do you want to open your statement first, or do you want to defer and either go first or second in your closing statement?
I'm happy to open.
Okay, you're happy to open first? Okay, we'll do that. And then that means that the first question will go to Rob, and then we'll go back and forth. So, opening statement, you have 3 minutes as our timekeeper ready. Just give me the cue, and I'll get things going. We are ready to go. So, Gene, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Good evening, everyone. I've seen a lot of familiar faces here tonight, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Gene Truono, and I'm running for the U.S. Senate. I'm a Delaware native. I went to Salesianum High School, the University of Delaware, and the Delaware Law School. I have 2 core principles that I've used throughout discussions in this type of venue and others, and that's the Constitution and states' rights. And those are the things that guide me when it comes to policy issues and discussions. So with that in mind, if you want to know more about my background and experience, you can go to our website at votetruono.com and click on our Facebook page, and it'll give you details of videos and issues that we've posted throughout the campaign so far. But the reason why I mentioned my principles is because I started doing due diligence for this campaign back in June of last year. And the first thing I did was open up the Republican Party platform from the last convention. And I reviewed all the platform positions and issues to see where I stood. And frankly, I was aligned with all of those positions except for one, and that's on marriage. And as an openly gay Republican who is married, I believe that the Constitution protects all of our rights to choose who we wish to choose to marry. And that was decided in 2015 under the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. But also the most recent case, which is the case related to the Masterpiece Bake Shop, which allowed for the First Amendment to kick in as it relates to religious freedom, I fully supported that decision and actually predicted that would be the outcome. I was surprised that it was a 7-2 decision, but I think it was the right decision made. So in terms of this campaign, I am, I think, fundamentally a conservative Republican. I think I espouse those positions, and I have throughout the campaign. And so I have one question for my opponent tonight. In an interview he did when he announced his campaign, he said to Susan Monday, and I'll quote, "There is a lot of things within the Republican Party that I don't agree with." And so, while I've just said I agree with most everything of the Republican Party, clearly the Republican Party platform, and I'd like to be your representative in Washington, D.C. to bring a conservative voice to Washington that we don't have today, because we have 3 progressive liberal Democrats who run our federal slate, a one-party rule in Delaware, which I think it's time to end. I thank you all for coming tonight. I hope and encourage listening and hopefully help you make up your mind as to who is the better candidate to defeat Tom Carper in the fall. Thank you.
Chief, thank you. I'll ask if you guys are reset and ready to go. And we will turn it over to Mr. Rob Arlett.
Okay, very good. And I want to thank Mike for hosting, and I want to thank Phoebe, Madam President, for also hosting this tonight. I think that Eastern Sussex Republican Club is one of the prominent clubs in our county, and I want to appreciate you personally for taking the lead on this debate, because ultimately that's what tonight is all about. It's us sharing our convictions and our stories and our positions and our policies to you. Who is to best represent this party in the general election? So why am I running, and why am I here tonight, and ultimately why are you here? Because we all, I believe that we all desire the exact same thing. And that is, we want to finally get somebody in Washington, D.C. who's going to represent you. Finally. We've had somebody that's in office for 42 years who is removed from us, removed from you, the people. He's all about partisan politics. He's all about party line. And that's what he does. He has removed himself from the people of our state. So why am I running? Because of that. No different than why I ran 4 years ago for the current position I hold, county council. There was somebody that was in office for 16 years that had some issues, and I chose to step up and lead and run against him, and we did. And we moved on to the general election, and we did the same thing. So we are a person not of talk, but we are a person of action. And that's why I'm running, and that's why you expect somebody from Delaware to do that in Washington, D.C. And I have here with me tonight, it is an honor, my lovely wife of almost 29 years, Lorna, so say hello over here. Thank you. And our eldest son, Justin, back here is 27, and he's got the camera rolling, so wave there, Justin. So welcome, I'm glad he's here. And then our youngest son is on a sailboat, literally, left this morning, Rhode Island, and head back down to the Naval Academy. As he's been on a 4-week, he's in his 4th week now of doing that. So rough life, but that's what he's doing these days, right at this moment. But that's why we're running. I think it's important that we finally have somebody that's in office that's going to finally represent us, the people. And again, we've got somebody that's in office that says one thing and does something very different. Sounds real good when he's in D.C., or I should say when he's in Delaware, but he votes very differently in Washington, D.C. And for those of you that know me, I'm not that guy. I'm a person of conviction. I'm a person of principles. And despite what's going on around me, we will stick to our guns. That is what we have a proven track record of. And that's what I disagree about many people on the party line, to answer your question, Gene. And that is, I think all Americans are fed up with party politics. We're tired of it. And when you have people in Washington, D.C., I don't care what party you're on, when they're sitting on their hands, not standing for the American people, but they're only standing for their party, I won't stand for it. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, I don't really give a rat's behind. I care about the American people, and that's who we are, and that's what we're going to do in Washington, D.C.
All right, Rob, thank you. All right, since we flipped the coin, Gene, you went first for the opening statement. As I mentioned, we will go and alternate. We will start with our first question here. These are written questions that were submitted by the club, and I've got some leeway to certainly add some of my questions and edit a little bit of what I see here, but I like a lot of what I see. So I want to get to, and we'll start with something that is very much in the news, and that is immigration. And we'll start with DACA. And Rob, you're up first. President Donald Trump called the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program a legal executive amnesty. Now President Trump is asking Congress to make the DACA program legally permanent. Please provide at least 3 bullet points in your opinion that must be included in the DACA DREAM Act program, and also give us your opinion about the latest, with the quote, controversy between parents and children being separated, albeit for a temporary period of time in certain cases.
Well, first and foremost, I think it's a very critical issue, which is also why I ran as the state chairman for our president, because he was most vocal about this very subject against all the other candidates. And my wife sitting over here is a legal immigrant from another country, from Vietnam. We are a personal testimony of how to do it the right way. We are a country of laws first, are we not? That's who we are. That's what separates us from all other countries around the land, and that we are a country of laws. So first and foremost, as we talk about this very important piece, we can't forget that. We can't forget that we are a country of laws. So let's, as we move forward with the conversation here, that's something that's most important, I think, that we have to adhere to. Number 2, I would think, is that's also really critical, is that we are the most compassionate, most caring nation on this earth, as evidenced by our actions and not our words. So we are a people who care. We are a people who are compassionate for other beings. It's evident by our international outreach to many foreign nations. So as we move forward this discussion of DACA, I will share with you this. I do not support amnesty. Let me repeat that. I do not support amnesty. So we have people that are in this country today, DACA recipients. I think it's a political football as of this moment, unfortunately. But the truth be told, the Democrats, where they had control, did nothing. The president has asked for the and first and foremost, I applaud his decision to remove it from President Obama, the regulation they put forth. Because ultimately, it's not their role, it's the legislature's role. It's the Congress's role to set forth the laws of immigration. Is it not? That's their job, that's their rule, that's their obligations and responsibilities. So as it relates to the DACA recipients directly, the conversation is, what do we do with these kids, right, that are here? And I think, number 1, I think the criminals that are here today, as the president has said, have got to go. The president has offered $1.8 million. The Democrats have refused it. I think they're trying to make this a political football come November. I think Gene would be agreeable to that. We've got Senator Carper, Senator Coons, and the Congresswoman today, right now, this moment, that have been encouraging, supporting illegal immigration in our state since they've been in office. More so, I would say, these last 4 to 6 years. And that's irresponsible of any elected official that has done this to uphold and defend the Constitution. You have got to protect the borders. That's number 1 responsibility, right, of an elected official. It's called public safety. I think DACA and immigration also equates to public safety. And I think you would agree with that also. Our first responders that have been in uniform before, that's our number 1 responsibility as an elected official that I am today, is to ensure that we uphold the laws of the land. So what do we do with these kids? It gets back down to that point. And I think, again, and I guess that means I'm out of time. Is that what that means?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Gene, your response?
Sure. So I disagree with Rob on this, not fundamentally, but in part. I would support the administration's position on this. The president came out last fall and said the DACA was an illegal usurpation of President Obama's authority to grant a waiver. What the president proposed, and what is now, I think, floating around in Congress, which will be negotiated tomorrow by the president and the Republican caucus, is a solution to the problem. And the solution would be, in exchange for the funds for the border wall, which I think is essential and important, not just for illegal immigration, but to stop the flow of illegal opioids like fentanyl and human trafficking across the border. In exchange for that, he would expect that the DACA recipients, and it was 1.8 million that he estimates, would be able to enroll in this program. They would have to make sure that they enroll in the program, sign up for either work, employment, education, or the military. And for that, they would be given a path to citizenship. if they got to the back of the line and would let legal immigrants come in the country first. And there's a process to do that. And also, he would end the practice of chain migration, and he would create a merit-based system. And I think our legal immigration system is broken as well. It takes a long time for legal immigrants to come into this country. There is a proposed bill in the Senate, Senator Cotton and Perdue. I would support that bill as well, because that would finally fix our legal immigration system, along with fixing, at least starting to fix, our illegal immigration system through this proposal that the White House has put forth.
All right. A follow-up in this area, and Gene will stay with you as we go back and forth here. With sanctuary areas, and you brought up also chain migration, and I'll bring up the visa lottery as well. We're seeing an increase in contempt for our border agents and a breakdown of local jurisdictions and following national laws and policies. Delaware's governor appears to be following this trend. What is your opinion, and what actions would you take as Delaware Senator? And again, your opinion specifically on chain migration and the visa lottery, which the president has come out against.
So the chain migration system, for those of you who don't understand it, is one where if I become a legal citizen through any means, I can bring family, friends, and relatives across to the country and gain an accelerated status. The proposal by the administration is to limit that to just spouses and children. I would make one exception, and that would be for elderly parents, because I think it would make sense that if you're caring for your elderly parent who happens to be in a country, let's just say it's Venezuela, and you wanted to care for her and sponsor your mother, in my case, my mother-in-law, I would want to do that. The legal immigration system today requires that you sponsor and allow for an individual to come to the country. You are responsible for that. So my husband's godson is spending the summer with us. He's never been to America. We both had to sign a document that said we would be responsible. And if he somehow disappears, which is what happens in some of these visa overstay processes, we would be held accountable and responsible legally. So I think the chain migration solution can be fixed. It will allow for the reduction in overall immigrants coming to this country through an extended process. The merit-based system to replace the visa lottery. So the visa lottery system is one where you just sign up at the embassy in the country where you live. There is some level of screening done by our government and by the local government, but it doesn't create a fairness approach. To come to this country legally, you have to state that you have a job or have the prospect of getting a job where you're going to take advantage of our educational system and then leave when you're done. So I think the whole merit-based system is one that warrants a deep consideration, and one that would probably help solve some of the problems of visa overstays, because it would create merit of people who wanted to come to this country, want to go through the visa work program, and then ultimately become citizens of the United States. And I think it's abhorrent that our state, or any other state, is thinking about creating a sanctuary state in the state of Delaware. I think it's a violation of the law. It's not enforcing the law. I get the difference between the 10th Amendment issue of states' rights and the federal program, but immigration is a federal program and should be enforced by our federal government.
All right, Gene, thank you. Rob.
Yeah, and I think I want to make one quick comment regarding the DACA recipients, and that is, as they are claimed to be dreamers, let us not forget all the Americans are dreamers too. I think sometimes there's too much focus on that group of people versus all of us, and I think I have a problem. It's Americans first, and I think we have to keep that in mind. As it relates to the immigration piece in general, I would agree. I think for the president and what Gene just stated, again, as my wife did, they followed the rules. And I grew up as a military Navy brat. My dad was a Naval Academy career man, and 15 years of his career I lived in San Diego. I lived 7 miles from the Mexican border down in Chula Vista. And I could see the Mexican hills, if you would, from our home. And a lot of friends, of course, that were immigrants, or legal immigrants, I should say. But again, it's a privilege to be in this country. It is not a right from anybody around this world who wants to be here. It's just not. And we have to understand who's coming here and why they're here. So if they want to be here, let's follow the rules. And I agree with respect to the chain migration. Just because is not good enough. Just because. We've had some terrorists that have come here that got here under that rule, that have done very bad things to the American people. So again, I think if you want to bring your family here, follow the rules that have been set. At the same time, we need to know who you are and why you are here. There has to be a vetting process. I don't care what country, I don't care what religion, I don't care what background. So that's number one. Are you going to assimilate into our way of life? If you're not, then you should not be here. I'll repeat that. If you're not going to assimilate into the American way of life, then you should not come here. You should stay back to where you are. My wife came here and taught and learned English. Yes, that's what she did. And so I support that. Number two thing, obviously, is the lottery. Do you want to put your national security and safety on chance? Do you want to do that? Probably not. It gets back down to my point of the vetting process. We have to vet that process. And of course, the merit base. We want the best and the brightest from around the world. We need them, truth be told. But I will tell you this also. I sat in my dentist's chair probably 3 weeks ago, and he was upset because there are immigrants that are coming here to get educated to be a dentist, and they're taking a priority over the Americans. And that's not something that he liked, truth be told. It was shared with me. And that's not something that he felt comfortable and was asking for me to make a change with respect to that. Again, we have to be Americans first. We need immigrants. We want it to be legalized, so let's stick to the legal process.
All right, Rob, thank you. As we go through tonight, try to tie in the questions with the areas that we're talking about. And while this may be considered domestic policy, I think you could tie this in to some extent with immigration. And certainly there's been a lot of controversy concerning voting and voting rights. And we'll tie that in here as certainly that is something that we look forward to doing in September and November. And we all, I think, very cherish it very much, as evidenced by the men and women out here tonight. So I'll bounce back and start with you, Rob, on voting. Your position on voting rights as it pertains to non-U.S. citizens, ex-convicts, and also voter registration as it pertains to same-day registration, ID required to vote, and there's also a push, usually by the left, but the push to eliminate the Electoral College. And what did you get your take on those items?
Sure.
Thank you.
I appreciate the question, and I think it's an important one. As is every 2 years, especially every 4 years during a presidential campaign, how critical it is that we know who's voting and that they're doing it properly and legally. Because every single person who votes illegally takes away a legal vote. It's not just about the far left, if you would, continuing to encourage, I believe anyways, different methods and mechanisms to permit illegals to voting. Because every single time that happens, it takes away your vote, the legal vote. I read this morning in preparation for tonight that it is reported that there are 24 million outdated and inaccurate voters in this country. Think about that, 24 million outdated and inaccurate records, voting records. I think it was in the state of Ohio, where the Supreme Court, I think, just ruled, permitting that state to purge their voting records. I would applaud that. I would encourage our state of Delaware. If you can hear us loud and clear, state of Delaware, we encourage you to get straight our voting records. For the rights of the Americans and for the rights of the Delawareans, the legal Delawareans, you have an obligation and responsibility to do so. It is also reported that there are 2.8 million registered people in more than 2 states. 2.8 million people are registered in more than 2 states around the country. Again, think about what's going on right now in our country. Think about what that means for our state of Delaware, with 950,000 people. I can tell you right now, based on my conversations with the administration, it is reported that there are over 55,000 illegal undocumented immigrants in our state. Do the math, that's over 6% of the population in Delaware is reported to be undocumented and illegal. That's 30% above the national average. What is that doing to our records, to our voting? Because it's already been evidenced, I think last go around, Mike, that people, you can do certain things to walk in and vote illegally. So we need to tighten down the reins. I would support voter IDs. If it's good enough for driving, it's good enough to vote. I would support that. And if it needs to be taxpayer provided as far as that ID, then so be it. We need to know who's voting and to ensure that they are here and that they are being legal, because ultimately your vote counts.
All right, thank you, Ron. Gene, your response, sir.
Sure. So I would agree with some of what Rob has said. I think we do need to clean our voter registration rolls. I find it amazing with the technology we have today that we cannot synthesize the lists within the state about those people who are either passed away and deceased and still on these rolls, who have moved. We have a postal service that tracks everyone's address. I think that should be integrated along with the federal lists of people who shouldn't be voting. Even though voting rights is a state's rights issue, I think the point of the matter is this is not a difficult problem to solve. The other part of the question was related to the Electoral College. And I remember learning about the Electoral College in high school, and I had trouble with it because I thought, well, shouldn't it just be a popular vote? Whoever gets the most votes wins? And the teacher eloquently instructed us that that would kind of phase out small states like Iowa and Delaware from actually having a say in the electoral process. So I would not want to tinker with the Electoral College. I think it works effectively. It takes a combination of those people who vote in those states and kind of categorizes each one of the states to give them the full power of their citizens to vote and select a president that we all think we can agree was the proper decision made in this last election. Thank you.
All right, Gene, thank you. As many of you know who listen to my radio show, very much a proponent of talking foreign policy, especially as it pertains to the president. Certainly Congress has a role in that. And Gene, we'll go back to you on this as we talk about foreign policy. And certainly in the news recently with the president, the historic trip to Singapore with the North Korean dictator. As you take a look at it, and I understand we don't have all the details quite yet, but for you, what are some of the safeguards and incentives regarding North Korea that you believe should be implemented by the administration to make this successful?
Sure. So I think we've all followed the kind of media hysteria on both the right and the left about this historic summit. But let's all be honest. I think we all would agree that we do want a denuclearized Korean peninsula. And I think the administration has done tremendous work, including the work of Nikki Haley as our UN ambassador, to get the full support of the other nations of the Security Council to put very tough sanctions on North Korea. Those sanctions worked because it brought North Korea to the table. They also worked because we squeezed China, who was violating those sanctions, because let's be honest, China was the one that was supporting North Korea. But China doesn't want a nuclearized North Korea either. So I think the safeguards that we have to put in place for total denuclearization of the North Korean peninsula is to have free and unfettered access to the nuclear weapons site, to be able to inspect them, and maybe inspect them along with the individuals from the UN and other countries. The US should have a role in that, as should Japan and China as well. Because I think with all of the nations coming together, trying to create a stabilized region, it will really make a much better outcome. And just to compare and contrast, I don't know if this is a question that will come up, I never supported the Iran deal because the Iran deal didn't solve the problem. This was an agreement that was made to delay the nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. And I just scratched my head and said, how could we ever agree to that? The only way we're ever going to be successful in the Middle East is to denuclearize Iran as well. And I think we'll do that through the same method of using sanctions and pardoning our allies around the world. This is a country, remember, that shouts death to America and annihilation of Israel. I don't think that that's acceptable on any stage, and I don't even think the UN can support that as well. So just to fully understand how important and the connection between Iran and North Korea is, I've often called this an axis of evil. And when I was in JP Morgan, I was head of compliance for the Global Correspondent Banking Department. And that department moved money around the world. And we saw firsthand how the funds flowed from Iran through Russia to Cuba, to Venezuela, to North Korea, and China. So let's make no mistake, that's how this all works. And these are the countries that would do us harm. So one agreement alone will not be sufficient. We need to work with our allies in the region to denuclearize North Korea and then move to Iran.
We will have a follow-up question concerning some of the other countries. I'll turn it over to you, Rob, back to the North Korea question.
Sure, and I want to, again, applaud our president and the administration's leadership. Yet again, when everybody else says no, he couldn't do it. But it's the old saying, as a former naval intelligence specialist, you trust yet you verify, right? It's all about verifying the words to ensure that they follow through on their actions. And he brought them to the table, and I will share with you that the administration was very intelligent in actually bringing it to Singapore and actually sharing the dream to the dictator. I don't know if you all saw that or caught that, but what they did is they actually showed and shared what North Korea could be. And I think that was a very intelligent thing to do, to get them out of their depressed and recessed country to see what they could do and what they could be. So I think to hold them accountable as we move forward, you got to go slow, you got to verify, but at the same time, the president, I applaud his leadership and the administration's leadership for for negotiating this to happen, based on those sanctions, based on the financial restrictions, and based on also the allies, getting them on board to ensure that we hold them accountable. So it's all about leadership. That's, again, what we need in our Senate from Delaware. It's all about leadership. It's all about courage. Again, I'll continue to repeat that because I think it's so very relevant in this conversation that we're having today in our country. And he brought that to the forefront in this particular negotiation, along with others. But specifically, again, about North Korea, is that when you're testing these bombs, and you are intimidating Guam and other territories of our allies in our countries, you know what? You're not going to sit back and do nothing. And that's exactly what he has done. He has stepped up and held him accountable, brought him to the table, and you know what? What's he going to do? Think about that. What is he going to do? He has no choice, and in reference to bringing it to the table. And I think he's going to continue to move forward and denuclearize and continue to play ball with our president and our administration, because otherwise I think he knows we have a real leader in this White House that will take him down. And he's not going to think twice about that. So again, I applaud him. I look forward to seeing what happens. It is with caution. You got to trust yet verify, but we are optimistic that our president and the administration will move forward with proper oversight, I would say, from our Senate. I think, again, that's their role also.
All right, Ron, thank you. And as I mentioned, there'll be a follow-up to this, and Gene alluded to some other countries as well in his answer concerning North Korea, and I think we'll expound upon that because there is a lot going on in the world, as we know, and you mentioned the axis of evil. Wanted to get your thoughts on the United States foreign policy as it pertains to Iran, the Middle East, but also Russia plays a big part, but as we know, those two countries are tied, and certainly China and North Korea, many believe that those countries are tied, and maybe even also with Russia as well. So we'll let you expound upon that, and then we'll come back with you.
Well, yes. I mean, we had 8 years of somebody who kept apologizing for America. And we were always leading from behind. And these other countries, no fault of their own, took advantage of our lack of leadership in this country. So when President Trump won and started to step up his game as it relates to leadership and letting these other countries know that there's a new sheriff in town and this is the way it's going to happen, we will start to hold you accountable, they start to take notice. So in reference to, Mike, in reference to the Middle East and Russia, they have to be, I totally agree with Gene and the administration, is we never supported that Iran. Never. Why would you do that? Think about all the corruption that occurred, all the cash that was on that plane, right, that we all read about, that actually happened. How could we allow that to happen in our nation? How could we allow that? But it did. So what do you do now? Well, you have to now move forward, and I think pull back and hold them accountable, ensure that number one, that they denuclearize, and that we have to do what we have to do, not only for them, but I have to tell you with Jerusalem and Israel, because ultimately I think that's a bigger part of this equation, that we have to connect those dots. And I've been into Washington, D.C., sat down with the administration of Israel, some of their cabinet members, back in March. And I sat down with them, having some conversations with several of them in reference to this very subject. And they love our president, and they love this administration because of what he's doing to that region, and that he's holding true on his words. And again, I continue to applaud what he has done, but I think we're just getting started. I think the next step, is holding Russia accountable. I think he's wondering what's going to happen because he's no longer the king in town over there. It's President Trump. And I think Iran is the same thing. So I look forward to the pathway that we're on, but again, it continue with oversight from the Senate, as that's their role and responsibility. So I look forward to the pathway that we continue to be on to hold these countries accountable, to safeguard ultimately the American people and safeguard ultimately our allies, to include those of Israel.
All right, Rob, thanks. Gene, your response, sir.
Sure. So I think the administration has done an outstanding job in foreign policy, and to all the countries we've mentioned. But let's be honest, I think the real reason why North Korea came to the table was because crippling sanctions. We stopped about 80% of their economy. And so they really need some relief in order for them, or there may be an overthrow, regime change within their own country. But we can't also discount the diplomacy. So in terms of the Middle East, one of the first foreign policy trips President Trump took was to the Middle East with 50 Muslim countries. Historic and groundbreaking. For the fact that Saudi Arabia was working with Jordan and Egypt, and even to probably a lesser extent Israel, is phenomenal. And I think this type of combination of powerful sanctions and diplomacy around the world is seeing some positive effects. Again, I agree with Rob, but we should be cautiously optimistic on how this all plays out. But the firm hand of this administration and the government, I think, is working very effectively in order to control, I think, what could possibly be a third world war. And I don't feel that discomfort anymore. I did during the last administration because of some of the errors in judgment. But the Middle East is a very complex situation. There's a mixture of both Sunni and Shiite Muslims, and they have very different agendas, and there's various different support. And so, in regards to Russia, they've been supporting Iran and Syria, and I think that's a very problematic issue. I think the administration has called Russia out on that. The fact that the president wants to actually work with Vladimir Putin to stabilize the region, I think is a good idea. Can we trust the Russians? Probably not. Can we trust the Chinese? Probably not. And so you can say trust but verify, but I think we have to do more with diplomacy and continue to work with our allies and continually work with our allies together to put pressure on both Russia and China to make a much safer world and use diplomacy and sanctions in order to control a clear world order.
Gene, thank you. And as it relates to foreign policy, we'll touch into some economic policies here, as this is also in the news recently, somewhat recently in the last couple of weeks. And we'll go back with you, your position on the Nafta agreements and tariff policies by the Trump administration.
So it's really interesting. NAFTA was hated by Democrats, and probably other people were benign to it, and some people don't really understand it. So I support the administration's approach to really making free but fair trade around the globe. And Canada and Mexico have had a competitive disadvantage. I think NAFTA is all but dead because we are unilaterally negotiating with Canada and with Mexico to create fairer trade agreements. So there's a lot of concern that we're going to have a tariff war or trade war around the world. I want to give the president a little more slack, at least in the short term, to see how this turns out. I think his tough talk and rhetoric, even after the G7 summit, has proven that some of the foreign leaders are scratching their head as to what they should do next. So call it a game of chicken, or call it a game of masterful negotiation. We'll see what the outcome is. I don't believe that President Trump, nor his senior economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, wants to have a trade war. I don't think any country does. But the United States has a very powerful position. We have the largest GDP in the world, larger than the 7 other countries combined. And with that, we have some leverage. Now, will we get equal parity in trade? Probably not. Will we get a much better deal? Probably. And I think this is the right approach, and it's about time that we did it, because if we don't do it now, we never will, and we'll always be at an economic disadvantage around the world.
Thank you. And Rob?
Yeah, I agree. I think, the president is a businessman. That was another reason why, that was my second reason why I supported him 2 years ago as his chairman, is because who better than a business person to bring economic opportunities back into our country and also hold others around the world accountable. What he's done his entire career and his entire life. So that was one of my cornerstones to get involved, and that continues to be a part of his platform, part of his policies today. it's America first. As it relates to the treaties and the tariffs that are ongoing, I agree, it is a little concerning, it's a little chess match, as is everything right now. It's all about the negotiation, it's all about the art of the negotiation, right, for those that might have read the book. And but again, it has to be America first. I would not be supportive of anything that's going to take away the freedom to trade for Americans. We need jobs back in America. We need jobs back in Delaware. We have got to get jobs back in Delaware, specifically manufacturing jobs back in Delaware. They are long gone. So my thought process, my lens in all decisions is there as we continue to move forward. And also, again, want to eliminate the additional tariff and non-tariff barriers. Again, free enterprise should rule the day. Less regulations and allow the dreamers to dream and go out and prosper and allow their business to grow. That's what is the cornerstone of our country. That is the cornerstone of you and your family. It's all about you and your dream and what we can do to ensure that you foster that dream. I want to continue, again, to ensure the rights of the American investors are upheld. Because that's not always the case. I think as evidenced by the last administration, decisions are typically made not in the best interest of us, but by who's got the biggest pocket. It doesn't make a difference where they're coming from. I think today the president was talking to a various group and wanted to make sure that it stayed with the Americans, and that continued to be a part of his discussion. And again, I would talk about no increase of manufacturing burdens, and that's basically it. We just need less regulation. We need more opportunities, less red tape for the American people, and it has to be a good deal. Each tariff is going to be different for each country. And I will share with you right now, for me to come up here right now and tell you all the details about that is kind of silly, because it's going to vary as it goes. It's all about good decisions, it's all about good judgment, and my cornerstone on all the thinking is it's got to be good for American people, it's got to be good for Delaware first.
Rob, I know you touched upon part of the next question that I had, but I'll ask as well. I want to also bring into this a little bit, and something that I'm glad that the club asked that doesn't get talked about much anymore, and that is national debt. But the main question is, what are the top 3 economic development challenges or opportunities that you believe exist in Delaware, and as a federal senator, how would you address them? And if you briefly want to touch upon the debt as well.
Sure.
Feel free to
I think the 3 things in Delaware are quite easy, because I sat down with one of the business owners, one of our largest chicken manufacturing companies in the state, for that matter around the country. I sat down with him back in, I don't know, it was probably like last November. It was myself and 3 of their top corporate people, right in Millsboro. And I asked them the very question, is what are your biggest 3 concerns about your business and growing and expanding right here in Delaware? And I've asked this very same question to many other people, the various state chambers, various organizations that supported me in one of my efforts to bring jobs to this great state. And it was 3 things that all came back and said the same thing, which is where I lose sleep over. And number 1 is the lack of proper infrastructure in our state. That is an economic problem. People are not coming here because we've got a problem with our infrastructure. So that's number 1 issue. We have got to focus on proper infrastructure, and fortunately we've got a president who is all about infrastructure and all about that. So we support that effort, and we will bring new opportunities, new infrastructure back into Delaware, because our current elected officials are not. That would be number 1. Number 2 is actually affordable housing. It's affordable housing, and that's a problem, because what's driving our market down here in Sussex County are the vacationers and secondary homeowners, right, that are bringing their money here. They're not making it here, but they're bringing it. So to answer your question about jobs and corporations and things along those lines, it's all about affordable housing. That will attract new opportunities and new industries. So that's the second concern as it relates to Delaware's economy. And the third thing is the regulations. We have a state house that is just not very friendly anymore. Not what it used to be. We used to be the chemical capital of the country, if not the world. We used to be a car manufacturing company, right? We used to be the nylon capital. We used to be the banking card capital of the world. Who are we today as Delawareans? What are we anymore? We are a state who's forgotten about you. Senator Carper has forgotten about the people, has forgotten about our kids, wanted to keep our kids here at home with us. We educate our kids and then they leave. So I'm going to be the job guy. So as we go to DC as your next U.S. Senator, that's going to be my focus, is bringing new opportunities back to our families, back to you to keep our kids right here.
All right, thank you. Gene?
Sure. So as a U.S. Senator, some of this is more, I look at it more from a local level. So if you're a state elected official or if you're the governor, you can focus on jobs in Delaware. But on the more broader federal level, there's two things I think that really are important for a U.S. Senator to focus on. And the first was tax reform. And we saw that get passed by a party line. Republicans voted for it, got it through. There's a proposal for tax reform too, which I think will also help continue to stir the economy on the local level. And the second is regulation, as Rob touched on it. So I like to say that the administration took the machete approach to cutting regulation. They would cut 2 regulations after a thorough review before any new regulation can be adopted. I think we need to take a scalpel approach and start with every industry and look at ways that we can cut regulation, because as you know, 2/3 of all jobs on the local level are created by small business owners. So we can't hinder or burden small business owners from creating jobs because of over-regulation. In terms of the national debt, I find it a very serious problem. You've heard this before. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. The economy is booming. The Fed predicts that we'll have a 4.8 GDP growth in the second quarter, which will create more jobs in and of itself because there'll be more capital to be invested in communities. And if we have that, we're going to increase our tax base. We've seen it every time. This is not economics 101, but the basics, if you look over history, we know that we cut taxes, we increase revenue. And with that increased revenue, we can work on the national debt. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem in Washington. And everyone talks about how we fix that spending problem, and no one's moving on it. There are some proposals that are being floated about the national debt on the national level. I think we need to pursue those. We need to cut government spending, fraud, waste, and abuse. We also need to shrink the size of our federal government. And while no one wants to talk about that, that's what we have to do. It's tough love, but it's the only way we're going to reduce the $22 trillion in national debt. The stirring economy will help, but Congress needs to stop spending money, they need to stop pork barreling, and they need to start thinking about the future for our children and their children, because we do not want to straddle them with this ever insurmounting national debt, which may never ever be solved if we don't start.
Gene, thank you. And I want to add to this in the next question. I think it's important, certainly reading about insolvency for Social Security and or Medicare within the next 20 years or so. That affects you out there. That affects me at some point in the future. Gene, back to you. We'll talk about what would you advocate for to keep Social Security and Medicare strong and financially solvent, and also if you want to address any ideas or support from Congress to lower prescription drug prices.
Sure. So we'll start with the prescription drug price first, because there was a bill that was brought to the floor about 4 or 5 years ago, and Senator Carper didn't vote for it. It would have allowed for reducing drug prices by allowing us to import them across the Canadian border in particular. And his argument for not supporting it is that we would have all these horrible drugs coming into the country. Well, Canada has a government very much like ours. They have a very similar organization to the Food and Drug Administration. And our Food and Drug Administration would also be responsible for ensuring that we only have safe medications that come across our borders. The other thing that ties to that in terms of reducing prescription drugs is through price transparency, which we don't have today. The insurance company says we'll cover 80% of the cost, so you pay a $10, $20 copay. But I think if you're given the option of understanding what the real cost of those medications are, you might ask your doctor for some other alternative, up to and including generics. And so I think it's important that we look at ways to help solve the problem of our healthcare system. I'm sure there'll probably be another question on the Affordable Care Act, so I won't go into much more detail about it. But I think these are the kinds of things we need to do as U.S. senators in order to change policy in Washington to help support people at the local level.
Rob?
Sure. Again, I think Medicare, Social Security, and then for that matter the drugs, is something, again, a little close and near dear to my heart because of caring for my elder parents who are no longer here with us. And we lived through this through their lens and through their eyes. My wife and I did, as we were literally their caretakers. My dad lived with us 24/7 his last year on earth here, as he had Alzheimer's and dementia, and it was the most difficult year of our entire 29-year marriage, I can tell you that. And But as it relates to the Medicare specifically, it is reported that it will be insolvent in 2026 if nothing changes. And I'll share with you right now that we are not going to remove any of those benefits for those that have already put in. So for our seniors, as were my parents, that's something I think that is, we have got to keep those promises. At the same time, we have to be held accountable on our spending and our habits. You know, there's 77 million baby boomers in our country. 77 million. That's a lot. And these healthcare increases are going to continue to grow rapidly as the population continues to grow. Number one thing that we need as it relates to the solvency of the Medicare and Social Security, well, I'll say Medicare, is competition. We have got to have competition. Right now we have little to no competition. And it's the same thing with that of the pharmaceutical drugs. Our current U.S. senator is in the pocket of the pharma companies, and vice versa. Look at his donations. I think that's sad. He cares more about his donations than he does his Delaware people. Because I think you should have the right to choose what's best for you, for what you could afford. And I'll take one other quick step on, and I don't know if this is going to be part of the discussion or topic or not, but I will share with you, I'm very supportive of medicinal marijuana. If it's good enough to eat, and what I mean by that is that today I will share with my wife is all about organics, all natural food. If it's okay to eat it, why isn't it okay to consider it as an option for pain relief? And I think that's something that we need to have more conversation. Hopefully we're going to talk more about that. But again, I think we need to get rid of the synthetic drugs if there's other alternatives. And I think also for cheaper mechanisms and methods. And I've got probably another minute and a half. I'm going to come back to the national debt, because I didn't cover that as much as I wanted to. And I do have 5 points that I wrote down, again, in reference to tonight. And that is I wanted to hit home a little bit more on that national debt. Because that also goes hand in hand, I think, with Medicare and Social Security services, and also the drugs. We can't control those expenses if national debt continues to spiral out. So I've got 5 points that I want to share with you real very quickly, as I've got another minute here. And that is we've got to reduce the annual spending percentage. Right now we're growing at a 5-point-some-odd%. We need to bring it down to about a 3-point-some-odd% growth. Reduce that growth. Reform entitlement programs. We need to care for those that are the most needy, who cannot care for themselves. I think it's an ethical issue, and I think my time is out. So we'll come back to those points later. Thank you.
Well, as Gene rightly said, in a follow-up to Social Security and Medicare, the Affordable Care Act, which we saw premiums go up for many Americans, and since then, the Republicans have pushed to do something about it. We haven't really seen much. So if elected, Rob, as we go back to you, tell us your thoughts on the current insurance situation and what you would advocate for as a senator.
Sure. As your next U.S. Senator, I'm going to advocate for what I'm going to be doing tomorrow night, and that is listen to the experts. Too many problems we have elected officials who think they are the all, they know it all, that they are the experts. And that was why we're not bringing this topic to words, we're taking it to action. So we are actually hosting an event tomorrow night, a healthcare forum up in Newark, a little plug here, whereas we're bringing in 3 professional doctors, some in the state and some out of the state, to talk about this very subject. Because I don't have all the answers, but they certainly will add to the conversation, and so will the community. But I think, again, the Affordable Care Act is not what it was to be. The Democrats pushed it through, didn't read it, so they passed it so they could read it. Are you kidding me? Isn't that crazy? Who does such a thing? And but that's exactly what happened. So it gets back down to, again, I think, to competition, which there's no light on that. Is that we're good?
Yes.
Okay, we're still good. So competition. I think there are some things in the Affordable Care Act that I think that I support, and that is the extension of the age group. I think I was okay with the 26-year-olds still being part of that family plan. I wish our economy was a lot stronger, as that wasn't required. But at the same time, I think ultimately, if we can have them stay in house, it's more cost effective for everybody involved, then we should consider that. I think also in reference to the pre-existing issues. I think obviously that was an automatic no for many companies. Again, I think if we can include them, granted their premiums are going to be higher, they should be paying more for that. But I think I look forward to the conversation tomorrow as it relates to the Affordable Care Act, because it is not what it is to be. And I was disappointed again in Senator Carper and Senator Coons for not voting for it when we had the opportunity to repeal it. Again, they're not focused on Delawareans, they're focused on their pocketbooks. That's irresponsible of them to do that, and that's not what I will do as your U.S. Senator. I will every single time vote for you and not the party politics or the pharmaceutical drugs.
Rob, thank you. Gene.
Sure. So the Affordable Care Act turned out to be anything but affordable. I think the real issue as it relates to it was two, I think, of its major flaws. The first was the mandate that everybody had to buy insurance. And the second was the mandate to prescribe specific types of insurance that limited to 3 programs. It did not end up, I think, delivering on the promises that it was intended to. I think to revamp a healthcare system, there are a lot of ideas that have been floated around in Congress. So these are not, I think, my ideas or even novel ideas. I think they're issues that they have studied and they understand it. I think the issue more is about having the people in Congress get together and solve this problem for the people. That's where we see the breakdown, I think, both in Republicans and Democrats in Washington. And I think that's one of the things we need to focus on. But more importantly, I think the way I look at healthcare, there are 4 primary constituents. Those people who get healthcare from their employer, those people who are in the individual market, those people who are on Medicare, and those people who are on Medicaid. And while there's some similarities and things that we can do across the board to reduce the cost of healthcare, including price transparency, there's a lot of things we need to do immediately for the individual market. That's the market of people who have to buy their insurance for themselves. We also can do things to strengthen the employer market, which will also help the other areas in the individual market, like expanding health savings accounts, reducing the cost of prescription drugs, allowing for people to buy insurance across state lines, broadening the pools of organizations like a National Association of Realtors or other groups so they can come together and reduce prices across the board, which will then help reduce the price for those people with pre-existing conditions, which need to be covered in insurance plans, but giving people the option of the plan to pick and not being proscribed by the government. I don't think we want the government running our healthcare system, and some people can argue we don't want the government running a lot of other things, which will again help reduce the national debt if we shrink the size of the overall government, not running things at the federal level, but allowing for these things to be decided at the state level. And I think that will go a long way in helping solving some of these problems, and that's what we should be talking about in Washington.
Thank you, Gene. Let's switch over to some general questions that were submitted by the ESRC. By the way, I would just ask, I know we heard a couple of phones, I would just ask that you make sure that your ringers are off or on vibrate. I think a pertinent question, maybe we'll get a little bit more differing answers on this. Gene, what do you like the most and least about President Trump's performance and policy so far?
So I've been asked this question: are you like Donald Trump? And probably maybe the antithesis. I think he is a very entertaining character. I am not a tweeter, nor do I ever intend to be. But I believe that President Trump believes that's the way he gets his message out. So I think probably his bigger-than-life personality is our biggest difference. But I think one of the things that is most important, and I think I'm most aligned with him, is his really, I believe, firm belief that he wants to see what's best for this country. We see that sometimes in his rhetoric, but I think so much more in his actions. Because you look at the problems he's taken on in his first 18 months, and he's actually solving those problems with a lot of resistance by a media that's complicit with the other side, by the other side that doesn't want to do anything the president wants to do. And we mentioned foreign policy before, but you look at the initiatives in domestic policy by doing tax cuts that have done a tremendous amount to stimulate this economy and create jobs. He spoke at Davos early on in his administration about how do you solve poverty, and he said the answer to poverty is a paycheck. Now that's very simplistic, but it's very true, because we lift people up out of poverty by creating more jobs. We'll reduce those people who are on the welfare rolls and the entitlement programs. And that will help solve some of the problems we have in this country. And I didn't answer the question about Social Security and Medicaid, and I think it's a very difficult issue. I think both my parents paid into the system, I have paid into the system. And Medicare and Medicaid have expanded far beyond what they were originally intended, and the fact that they may be heading towards bankruptcy is very troubling, especially in the fact that our U.S. Congress has spent the money as opposed to keeping it in a reserve as it was supposed to be intended. So we need to look at ways of turning Social Security much more into a retirement savings account, and we need to look at Medicare and determine how we're going to make it more efficient, reduce fraud and waste, but also I think we're going to have to take the real hard step and determine whether or not we means test and how should we divide up those, the cost and expense and the distribution of that healthcare system. There are people who can afford their healthcare. Medicare was never intended to be a one-size-fits-all program for everyone. And so I think we really need to look very closely and study it very carefully, but I think we need to do something about it. And like with everything else in Washington, it's hard, right? But if we don't start the conversation and we don't pass, and if we don't put up legislation that will at least create that dialogue and discussion on both sides of the aisle, we'll never solve this problem. And it'll be bankrupt before we know it. And then we'll be looking back and saying, now how do we solve that problem? A lot harder problem to solve.
All right, Ron.
Sure, I think it's a great question, and I too am asked often. As past state chair, and I think four things that I can think of off the bat that I most like about what he's done is specifics. I would say is the tax reform. That was a historical moment, and I as your next U.S. senator, I want to make that permanent. That right now they're not, and I want to ensure that it becomes that way. So tax reform, I think, is number one. It's all about putting your money back in your pockets. You know better what to do with it than the government. Government is the problem and not the solution, yes, with your money. So give it back to you so you can spend it as you see fit versus the government wasting it in most cases. Again, also, I think that's number one. Number two is the economy and the jobs. Our economy is growing today much better than everybody had anticipated, other than maybe the president himself. The jobs are coming back in our country. The pride is coming back in our country, and our economy is growing, but not Delaware's. We are falling behind the curve as compared to our fellow states around the country. Again, because it's the lack of leadership that we have in this state and the policies that are within the state. So as a U.S. Senator, we will have some influence with those that are here to ensure that they start to step up, but focus back on the people. So economy and jobs, I would say, is number two. Number three thing, again, is immigration. I think I'm proud of his continuing effort to focus on immigration, on legal immigration, on reforming of the immigration laws. Getting back to my point earlier that we are a country of laws. We are a compassionate and caring people, but we're a country of laws first. So I applaud his continued effort and his policies, Mike, to that point. And biggest thing of all, and on the positive, truth be told, aren't you being proud of being American again? Aren't you proud of being an American again? That's what he's brought back into our country. It's called pride. It's called patriotism. I know you feel it. I know I feel it. That's why we got involved 3 years ago, because I wanted to be a part of that effort. So that's the fourth thing. On the negative, well, on the policy side, I mean, again, personality-wise, Gene, I think that you're right. We don't have the similar personalities as the president, but that's also why he got elected, isn't it? And it's not really policy, but I don't like his decision about what he did with and I know why, but about the Philadelphia Eagles. Some of you guys may get mad at me over that one. But truth be told, when he uninvited because of what was going on there, I would have still brought him. Because ultimately it's the people's house, and then you could, do something for the 5 or 6 players that were going to show up, but I still would have brought him down. It's not a policy. I know it's a sports thing. You're a big sports guy, but most recently, I will share with you. I wish he would have brought him, and then they could have been embarrassed themselves for not being at the house.
I know we're winding down this half of the debate. Just a couple more questions, and then we'll take a timeout. I know that we'll turn things over to Kevin briefly, and then there'll be sign-ups for audience questions. And I think this is obviously a very good question, the general category, as well as we decipher here who we're going to vote for. And a question from ESRC: what is the biggest policy difference between you and your opponent? We'll shoot it back to you, Rob.
Well. Policy difference?
Yes.
Well, I've been in office. I have a record. Gene does not. So I can't speak to that because he has no record as a Republican. He has no record of when things get really tough, how you're going to act. And I think that's important. You know, I've been in office now for almost 4 years, and we've been through toughness on some land use decisions that you all know that are not all that popular. They're not. On an ordinance that I brought forward, convictions because it was about jobs. I care about our community. I want jobs. Most recently, I'll share with you, I brought forth somebody that we are appointing to one of our positions, getting a lot of phone calls, a lot of pressures for me to select a certain person. And I chose not to, because I chose who was best qualified on the resume and their experience. Do you understand what I'm talking about here? I'm not going to go to Washington, D.C. and allow the lobbyists, allow the corporations, allow those people to influence me and dissuade me from my convictions and my principles that you have elected me to do. Don't you want somebody who's going to fight for you, no matter what, how difficult it might be? That's the problem with Washington. It's called the swamp. We've got that same swamp in Delaware, if you haven't noticed. Maybe it's called an estuary, maybe it's called something a little different. But we have that same challenge here in Delaware, as we do in Washington, a little different. But too many people make decisions not on their principles, but based on getting reelected or who's paying them maybe a donation or whatever the case may be. That's not who I am. And if you want that guy, don't vote for me. If you want somebody who's going to stand on principles and not bend, not break, then that's who I am. I have a proven track record of doing such, and I want to carry that and bring that to Washington, D.C.
Rob, thank you. Gene?
Sure. So I'm not the career politician. I'm sort of the outsider like Donald Trump. I've spent my 30 years in business. I built global compliance teams all around the world. I've negotiated with the Singaporean regulators, the Australian regulators, the Canadian regulators, and the US regulator. I was asked to sit on an advisory group with FinCEN, the Financial Enforcement Crimes Network, to lead a new subcommittee on regulatory reform and reduction. I was asked when I was in the credit card industry to lead the credit card industry in a consortium to reduce the minimum payment and to look at the credit reclassification guidelines which dealt with charge-off loans. I also, in my time at PayPal, had a wonderful experience. I had 120 people, most of which I hired around the world. We had offices in Singapore, Hong Kong, in Australia, in Canada, Russia, Brazil, and in Luxembourg where we had a bank. I've spoken to forums all around the world, but one of the things I'm most proud of, I was asked to speak in front of the Financial Actions Task Force in Brussels, Belgium. And I looked at the regulators. These are regulators from 34 countries that regulate anti-money laundering laws for all financial institutions globally. And I said, you know, you guys have been at this for a lot longer than I have in a long time, but we haven't solved this problem yet. I think we should change the standard for regulatory compliance to make it more simplistic. To have two levels, one for misfeasance and one for malfeasance. And the misfeasance would be if you have controls in place to identify issues, less prescriptive regulations, and allow financial institutions to solve the problems and self-report, that's the carrot, you'll find a much better outcome. And then rules for malfeasance. If a bank breaks the rules or finds the gaps and does nothing about it, you should close the bank. Those rules are already there. They can close banks today, regulators around the world. And there were several countries that came up to me, including France, the fellow from the US, and said to me, Gene, that's exactly right. That's what we should be doing. But you know how hard it is to change the rules. And I said, yes, I do. But with will and determination, we can do that. And if we use that standard from a regulatory compliance perspective, we can shrink the size of government regulatory bodies, we can create a better supervisory process, and we can actually solve the problem. So my life's experience, I think, is the answer that distinguishes me from my opponent in terms of what I've done, how I've done it, and how I can effectively lead you in the state of Delaware in Washington, D.C.
Gene, thank you. Final question here for this segment, because I know it got started a little bit early, and this is a chance for you to also expand a little bit about what you just mentioned. And we'll tie this into, and as we know in a blue state, Part of this primary is there's going to be some similarities between the both of you, but also, there are some differences, and we'll point those out. But who also has the best chance on taking on a Democratic incumbent in a blue state, who can win some Democratic votes and independent votes as well. And also, a question that I've received about also tapping into the Trump revolution in the state, but also being able, again, to go out and get those Democrats and independents. So the question is, why will those voters vote for you in addition to the Republicans instead of Senator Tom Carper or your opponent to represent Delaware?
Sure, that's a great question. And it's one that I did a lot of soul searching about when I first decided to think about doing this. We started doing due diligence in June of last year. I met with Republican, Democrat, and independent friends of mine. Actually, one of them, who was the treasurer for Lisa Blunt Rochester, I've known for 30 years, a very good friend of mine. He said, Gene, Tom Carper's been really hard to beat. He's a really nice guy. He's very well loved in this state. And I said, but I think it's his time. And at the end of the conversation, after I explained why I was running, he said to me, I think it is his time too. So I think there are a lot of Democrats in the state, and as we've talked to veterans and other groups, really think that while Tom Carper has served the state, it really is time for him to retire. And I think bringing a fresh voice from an outsider who has 2 generations of Delawareans, my whole family, they're my 3 brothers and 3 sisters all supporting me, who have their nexus of friends and networks, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And as we talk to those folks, bringing a fresh idea for a voice from Washington, for Washington from Delaware. My mother's attorney, who was a staunch Democrat, said to me, Gene, well, I'm going to vote for you anyway because I like you. But she said, I think one-party rule is time to end in Delaware. She said, even as a Democrat, I think we need someone from the other side of the aisle to negotiate and argue the other point of view so we come up with a much better outcome. So as we continue to work, going up and down the state, meeting with people, I think that while Tom Carper might be an insurmountable hill to climb, as most people think he is, I think it's his time. The other thing that I think is really important is that in Delaware, I think it's a very small and charming state. We have 3 different counties that are like 3 different states. And I think it's touching and connecting with all of the voters throughout the state of Delaware to make sure they understand this is somebody who wants to represent them. And not being a career politician, I think that's an advantage. The other advantage that I think, and you'll hear pundits on both sides of this aisle say, well, there's a blue wave or there's a red wave. And frankly, I think the old adage is true. It's the economy, stupid. And I think the fact that the Trump administration has pushed through policy issues that are really improving this economy. I mean, think about it, a 4.8% GDP growth in the second quarter. That's the Atlanta Fed saying that. That's not me. That's phenomenal. When people have more money in their pockets, they're more secure, they don't want change. So that'll put the wind beneath our sails in terms of maybe saying, we need another Republican from the state of Delaware in Washington to represent the state, to continue to push the policies this administration has put through. So I think for all of those reasons, this could be our year. I believe it will be our year. And I really hope that you can all come around and support me for your next U.S. Senate.
Gene, thank you. Rob, your response here.
I think the question is why can I beat Senator Carper versus my opponent?
Yes, sir.
Well, I think the question should be asked, why is Senator Carper afraid of me? So I think that's what he thinks. He thinks that I can beat him. I say that because the day I announced, he came out after me. Think about that. 42-year incumbent comes after somebody the day they announce. Have you ever heard that before? I think he's fearful of and he's never made a mention of my opponent or even Chuck Boyce. Ever. But he came after me by name the day of. The day after, he did an email blast looking for donations. So the question is, why is Senator Carper so concerned, and why is he fearful about our candidacy? Because, you know why? Because I will expose his inability to lead, his inability to focus on you, Delaware. Because that's what he's done. He's removed himself. And I think he is a good man. I think he's a very good man. I think he's done some good things for our state. He's nominated our youngest son to the Naval Academy. He said some very good things to us as a family. But at the same time, we're a person of principles, and we'll call out one's record. And he knows that, which is the day I did when I announced. So I think that's number one. He knows that we're going to bring it. I think number two is I have already proven that I can attract the independents and Democrats. When I won my general election, we had many independents, many Democrats focus on and help us in our campaign. Because I'm not a partisan guy. I'm not a political guy. I'm a people guy. You in here know me for many years. I care about people, not so much the party politics. So that would be the second. I have a proven track record of being able to attract the independents and the Democrats. And the third thing, we all know in a statewide race in Delaware, you need to attract the African American votes. Yes, up in Wilmington. Everybody in this room knows that. 24% of our population in our state is African Americans. Well, isn't it interesting? The day I announced up in Wilmington, in the city of Wilmington, downtown city of Wilmington, I had 2-3 African American leaders of churches standing next to me, Democrats, supporting me and endorsing me. They didn't do that for my opponent. They didn't do that for Chuck Boyce. But they did it for me. Because my heart is in this for the people and no other reason. They know that. They trust me. And they're ready to start knocking on doors with me and with you. That's why we're going to win it.
Rob, thank you. This is going to wrap up the first part of the debate. Before I turn it over to Kevin, I just want to thank the ESRC for some excellent questions. I know certainly I wasn't able to get to everything, but I hope I was able to touch upon a little bit of everything here with some domestic policy, social programs, foreign policy, some general questions. We touched upon immigration as well. And hopefully we may have a second debate down the line, but I know the audience will have some outstanding questions the second time around. But again, thanks to the ESRC for some great questions, and hopefully I was able to touch upon some areas that you're really thinking hard about tonight as to who you make your decision to vote for between these two gentlemen. So Kevin, I will turn it over to you now, sir.
Thank you, Michael. We're going to take a 15-minute intermission. During that time, if you would like to ask a question in the second half of the debate, please come to the back, give us your name, we'll give you a seat to sit in so that we can find you at the appropriate time. And ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the intermission. Thank you.